Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Mark Delaney. I cover the auto and industrial tech sector for Goldman Sachs. I'm very pleased to be hosting Thomas Healy, the founder and CEO of Hyliion, a company that is focused on disrupting the heavy-duty truck market with an environmentally friendly product set. Thank you for being with us today.
Mark, thanks for having me a part of this. We're excited to share a little bit more about the Hyliion story and what we're up to down here in Texas.
Great. Looking forward to that. So let's jump into the Q&A if I could. And to start, I'm hoping you could discuss the two main products that Hyliion has, its hybrid solution and then also the ERX powertrain. What do each of those do and how are they advantageous to other options in the market?
Absolutely. So, to start off at the high level here, so Hyliion is bringing forward electrified powertrain solutions to the commercial vehicle space. So it goes without saying, the market has been in a total tailwind here in terms of, the electrified vehicle space, especially in the commercial sector. And so, that's where Hyliion's really playing. But we're taking a little bit different of approach than some of the other solutions that are being brought to market. Our focus as an organization is really being a powertrain company. So you're seeing some of the other players in the space coming forward with full vehicle solutions. Hyliion's approach is actually working with the existing truck OEMs and being able to offer new electrified powertrains that actually fit into their existing vehicle architectures. As you mentioned, we have two different solutions. We have our hybrid solution and our Hypertruck, which is our fully electric range extender vehicle. Both of these solutions can go in the existing chassis that are being built by the OEMs like Freightliner Daimler or PACCAR or Volvo or International. And, as we look at these two solutions, each of them has a little bit different of a value proposition. The hybrid product is one that we're shipping today. We're in low volume production right now, moving that into larger volumes this year. And then that solution is really designed to be an add-on to the existing powertrain of the vehicle. So we replace the rearmost axle of the truck with an e-axle, mount a battery pack onto the frame rail, and you've basically got a hybrid electric truck. It's almost like a large Toyota Prius. The goal of it is either to reduce fuel consumption of the truck or be able to improve the vehicle performance of the truck and adding more horsepower and torque. The Hypertruck, though, it's a little bit different of a story. It's a fuel agnostic, fully electric range extender vehicle. So the way it works is the powertrain is purely powered off of electric motors. Then we've got a battery pack on board, but as opposed to taking that battery and plugging it into the grid in order to recharge the batteries, we actually use an onboard generator that can produce electricity locally on the truck and charge the batteries up as you're driving. So you're getting the benefits of electric, but you don't have the downsides of a really large battery pack and cutting into the payload capacity of the truck. Now, one of the things I mentioned before was that it's set up to be a fuel agnostic vehicle, though. And so to bring that solution to market, we're actually using natural gas and renewable natural gas to start. But then as technology evolves, we're able to step into the hydrogen space or even potentially other fuels as we get down into the future here. So really designed to be the future-proof truck of what we hope to have rolled out here starting next year.
That's a fantastic introduction, and I think we're all excited to see these products progress in the quarters and years ahead. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your manufacturing strategy, because I think that's an interesting approach where you have some partners that are involved in helping Hyliion get to market.
Yeah, so the approach is asset light, right? We looked at all options. We looked at, should we go set up a million square foot manufacturing plant and try to build these ourselves, or should we partner with others? And frankly, what we found is the smarter approach here was to partner with others. We obviously could go set up a plant, but that's going to take years to do. And frankly, it's not our core competency, right? Our core competency is building electric powertrains. And so we've set up partnerships. One in particular is with Dana. They're an investor in Hyliion from a couple of years back. And we've got a supply agreement with them where they're able to use their manufacturing facilities to actually produce our products for us. And so from Hyliion's end, we see that as a way to really just accelerate our timeline of being able to get our product to market, because companies like Dana, frankly, know a heck of a lot more about manufacturing things than we do, and it allows us to stay focused on what we're really good at.
That's interesting. And the company's announced several new hires recently, some that have already joined the company, including at CFO, marketing, and in sales. Can you speak a little bit more to the team that Hyliion is building, as well as some of these recent new hires.
Absolutely. So this Monday was actually Sherry's first day in the CFO role, and so we're thrilled to have her on board. But she brings a wealth of knowledge to the company, both from the public market space as well as even in logistics itself. So she's most recently been CFO of a publicly traded company down in Florida. Before that, she was at Dean Foods and at Frito-Lay PepsiCo. And one of the really exciting things when we interviewed with Sherry was that at Dean Foods, she was actually on the finance team, but representing the logistics side of the organization. And so she kind of has the understanding of how trucking works, but actually from a fleet's perspective, which is really valuable because those are ultimately the groups that we're looking to sell our technology to. And then on the sales and marketing side, we brought in a handful of individuals, but two really strong leads, both of them coming with strong trucking experience. So on the sales side, Bobby Cherian's bringing experience of being at tier 1 suppliers, as well as automotive car OEMs like Ford and GM. And then from Matt Lose's side on the marketing, he's been at publicly traded companies before, but one of which in the trucking space was Bridgestone, and specifically he was on the commercial vehicle side of that. And so, as we're looking to grow Hyliion here, one of the big focuses that we announced in our last earnings call was building out the executive team. And we're at a point today where we've really started to fill in some of those key spots that we needed to do in order to be able to scale this organization. And one of the things that you'll find as kind of a common trend here is that we're bringing in people that have public company experience as well as commercial vehicle experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe talk about the team and company more broadly. How many people are at Hyliion now? How large do you envision the company getting, say, at the end of this year?
Yeah, so we're a little over 100 people now, which has been a big growth for us, even just over the last few months. And over the next year here, we plan to even more than double where we're at today. And so a lot of hiring going on our end. You can see it from our website, the amount of jobs that are posted right now. And we continue to plan on scaling and growing the organization through 2021 and beyond. And it's growth across the whole company, whether it's on the engineering side. That's obviously a huge focus for us, but it's also in sales and operations and marketing. It's truly across the board and just scaling up the organization to really be able to go achieve those revenue numbers that we've projected.
That's great. We spoke a bit about some of the products to kick off, but I'd love to dig more into those, and maybe we can begin with the hybrid solution. It's sampling now, as you mentioned. Speak a bit more to what customer reception is like, what type of emission savings in these real world tests that customers are running, what kind of savings are they actually realizing?
Yeah, so I think the initial customer response is really around it's the logical step to getting into electrification, right? So if you're a fleet owner, I mean, your goal is really to get assets from point A to point B and do it as inexpensively as possible. And so fleets are enamored by electrified technology. Every fleet knows that it's coming, but they're trying to figure out what's going to be the right solution for them. And so when we bring forward the hybrid electric solution, it's a way to kind of step into electrified solutions, but not be reliant on them. And what I mean by that is that, if our hybrid solution has an issue or doesn't work for some reason, well, you can still drive that truck on the conventional powertrain. We don't down the vehicle on the side of the road and need to send out a tow truck to go pick it up, right? That's very different than, moving to a fully electric solution. And so for fleets, it's a great way for them to kind of get into electrification, get their technicians understanding what having a battery pack on a truck is like, what having an e-axle is like, how do we service it, how do we maintenance it, and then from a savings standpoint, we're seeing in the 5 to 10% fuel economy savings when you're operating the vehicle in hilly terrain areas, as well as we're also able to offer APU functionality off of the truck. So one of the things that is very unique about the trucking space, very different than passenger car, is that drivers actually sleep in these vehicles, right? You see them lined up on the side of the highway at rest areas, and when they're sleeping in those trucks, they need to have air conditioning or heat and electricity to run the TV and things like that. So with our solution, what we've been able to do is actually supply that electricity that drivers need through our battery pack, which allows them to turn the diesel engine off in the truck and not idle anymore, which is not only a huge opportunity for cost savings, but also a huge emission savings in these rest areas. And then the other use case for that product is actually putting it on natural gas vehicles, conventional natural gas trucks, and using it as a power assist. So, conventionally natural gas trucks have been underpowered. So we're able to add over 100 horsepower extra to the vehicle and really improve the vehicle performance compared to a conventional natural gas truck.
That makes a lot of sense. And maybe talk about how this may be adopted in terms of, is this something that's going to be retrofitted onto existing trucks, or do you see this more as an option where if I was ordering a new diesel truck or a new natural gas based truck, I could say, oh, actually, I want to have the Hyliion product included?
Yeah, so the long-term vision for both of our products is installed on brand new trucks before it even gets delivered to the customer. Where we're at today on the hybrid side, though, is we're set up where you can either install it on the brand new truck or you can do it as a retrofit, though, as well, which for some fleets is really interesting because they already own assets. They can send them to us. We can do the upfit of the hybrid product, ship it back to them, and now they take an asset and kind of give it a new life by making it a hybrid electric vehicle. On the Hypertruck solution, though, the focus is really on doing this on new vehicle installs, taking brand new chassis from the OEMs, installing our e-drivetrain solution with the range extender, and then being able to ship that as a new product to the fleet.
That makes sense. And diesel prices are relatively low at the moment, under $3 per gallon. Is that a barrier to adoption to the hybrid solution, or are these other benefits enough that you're still seeing adoption despite where diesel prices are?
Yeah, so diesel's low right now. I mean, I think we'll see what happens with the new administration. I think there's a big focus to move off of diesel, so we'll see what that brings. But it is a linear equation in terms of what the price of diesel is versus what your payback is going to be on the hybrid solution. And so, obviously, from a fleet standpoint, the higher the diesel costs are, the quicker they're going to receive a payback off of the hybrid solution. With like the $3 mark, I think we're driving about a 2-year payback, 2 to 3 year payback on the product. So obviously, as diesel prices are lower, that gets longer. But it really depends on the fleet, right? Some fleets are really driven off of more of the emission savings, moving towards greener solutions, and then that's obviously a really great solution for them. Some other fleets are keeping their assets for a long time. I mean, there are some trucking organizations that are keeping their trucks 7 to 10 years, and then having a longer payback is totally fine for them. Now, there are some fleets that are more in the 4-year sort of a mark, and that's where they obviously want to make sure that they're getting that ROI before they're having to sell that asset. So lower diesel prices mean the payback's longer, but at this stage we're still seeing that there's a strong demand for that solution. And as we were saying before, it's that first step into electrification.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I'd love to speak more on renewable natural gas and an important part of the value proposition with the ERX powertrain. But before we go more into the ERX, can we talk to the RNG market, and for people who are maybe not as familiar with what that is, to talk about where RNG comes from and why it's environmentally friendly?
Yeah, so I feel like RNG is one of these things. It's like a little unknown secret in the natural gas space, which is there's a whole mega trend going on right now towards being able to capture methane that's coming off of landfills and dairy farms, wastewater treatment plants. And so conventionally, those assets that I just mentioned would conventionally produce methane that would gas off into the atmosphere and produce a lot of emissions. There's this new process going on of actually being able to capture those gases before they go off into the atmosphere, and actually take them and pump them into the natural gas pipelines and use it as a fuel source for our trucks, as opposed to just letting it gas off. And when you do that, the actual impact from an emission standpoint is terrific. We can actually become a net carbon negative producing vehicle in some applications by using renewable natural gas, because what we're basically saying is, hey, take what would have been really strong pollutants and use it as a fuel in a vehicle, and ultimately the pollution that's going to come out of that vehicle is a lot less than what it would have been before. And so, RNG, there's a lot of momentum going behind it. CARB has been really the inventor behind RNG. They were ones that kind of came up with this structure and really promoted it. And we're seeing it as a great way for fleets to move towards more renewable, sustainable fueling solutions, and it'd be a huge positive impact for the environment.
And so the ERX powertrain can run off of renewable natural gas, and somewhat recently the company announced an agreement with ANG about giving your customers access to RNG and at good prices. Talk a little bit more, if you could please, about that agreement.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, RNG gets pumped into the natural gas pipelines, and so when you go to your fuel provider, whether it be ANG or others like Clean Energy or US Gain, you can actually work with them to select how much of your fuel you want to come from renewable natural gas. So set up very similar to the electric grid, where when you plug into an outlet, you don't know if that electricity is coming from coal or nuclear or wind and solar. But when you're setting up your purchasing agreement, you can actually select if you want it to come from renewable sources. Same exact thing in the natural gas space. You use the same station, whether you want RNG or CNG. You really just work with the fuel provider to spec how much of it you want to come from RNG. And so that's one of the great things with working with American Natural Gas, is that they're tapped in very heavily into the RNG space. They're able to offer fleets up to 100% RNG. And then we've also created a partnership with them, where we can offer the fleets that are running the Hypertruck a preferred lower cost pricing solution, so that we really see this as a way where we can take a truck that maybe hasn't conventionally played in the natural gas space before, but we can offer them great pricing across the country to really get them into using renewable natural gas.
That's really interesting, and I think there's some government support as well for renewable fuels. If you could speak to what you're seeing on that front, please.
Yeah, so the RNG space, there's LCFS as well as REN credits that are associated with it. Kind of going back to CARB has been a huge supporter of it. And one of the interesting things that we've seen is, since the Biden administration has come in, we've seen a large increase in kind of the value of those credits. So for a fleet, that actually means that the cost of using RNG as a fuel in your truck is actually becoming less, because that credit is now worth more, and the cost to acquire that fuel is less. And so, as that continues to happen, we see that as a really positive thing for fleets that we're working with that want to move to RNG, because it drives down their cost of operation of the Hypertruck.
In terms of the timeline to have the ERX powertrain on trucks, it's a little bit farther out. The company's targeting revenue in 2022 with that product. Can you speak more to what the development timeline is like for the ERX? What are some of the milestones that Hyliion is hoping to achieve, and that we should be thinking about as investors?
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you wouldn't mind, I'll kind of talk to the roadmap of where we're going even after launch of that solution as well. But right now we're in the thick of the commercialization phase of things. So in our last earnings call, we mentioned that we've engaged with FEV to assist us with some of the engineering design and work on the solution. We're in the process of building more trucks right now. Our targets in terms of some key milestones here are being able to actually launch demo trucks by the end of this year with fleets. One of the other things we indicated was that we're working on pulling together kind of those initial list of fleets that are going to be the kind of partners in rolling this technology out. And so that's something to watch for, as well as we get closer to doing those demos, doing some announcements around who we're working with. And then, as you mentioned, going into production in 22 here. But, as it was kind of alluding to, the roadmap here is really interesting, because, we're seeing a lot of interest in hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell right now, right? We're seeing a lot of SPACs. We saw another one yesterday come to market focusing on commercial vehicles going to hydrogen. And, that's a trajectory and a roadmap that Hyliion believes in as well. But, our question is, when is hydrogen going to happen? Because there's a lot of things that need to take place in order to be able to move to a hydrogen-based trucking network. You need to drive the cost of hydrogen down. Right now, hydrogen costs are north of 10x of what natural gas costs are today. You need to actually produce more hydrogen and produce it through electrolysis, not through steam methane reforming, which, that's one of the unknown or unspoken about things in the hydrogen world right now, is over 90% of our methane, or over 90% of our hydrogen, is coming from steam methane reforming, which is actually more pollutive than even running a diesel truck. So we got to shift to actually using electrolysis, which is clean hydrogen. And then we got to build out the infrastructure and the network out there to be able to refuel these vehicles. So Hyliion's approach here is the Hypertruck powertrain is the same vehicle architecture, whether you're using a natural gas generator or a hydrogen fuel cell generator. The only thing that changes is that generator that's under the hood. And so from that standpoint, what we're doing, our philosophy here is we've got a roadmap here where we can get vehicles deployed on renewable natural gas using that kind of futuristic, fuel agnostic powertrain. And then when the time for hydrogen is right, Hyliion will be positioned to be able to roll in hydrogen fuel cell generators into that same powertrain. And then, it's kind of from our business model standpoint, it's saying we can go start producing revenue right now off of this powertrain and not wait for when hydrogen is ready. But when hydrogen does become available, then Hyliion will be positioned where we've already got millions of miles proven out on these powertrains, and we're the logical solution to step into that hydrogen fuel cell space.
Yeah, and just to make sure we're understanding this properly, if you wanted to put a hydrogen fuel cell generator on your truck, I mean, the incremental design work and development is relatively minor, if anything at all.
Yeah, so when you think of the vehicle, the batteries stay exactly the same, the e-accessories, the actual electric motors, the drive axles, all that's the same. The thing that changes is the generator under the hood that charges the batteries. And then the other thing that changes is you need to use a higher rated tank that can actually store hydrogen versus natural gas tanks have a lower rating. But look and feel of the tanks are identical, right? So it's really, it's a gas-based fueling system. So it's a very small step to move from a natural gas generator to a fuel cell versus, as other competitors are coming into this space, they're coming to market when hydrogen's ready. They're going to be coming to market saying, we've got a totally new electric drivetrain, we've got new battery packs, a new generator, or new fueling solution. Here's our whole truck. Versus Hyliion saying, when hydrogen's ready, all we have to do is replace that generator to a fuel cell and offer the same powertrain.
Yeah, well, I mean, to dovetail on that, right? If I understand correctly, I mean, the generator today is it's a natural gas engine, which isn't something Hyliion is manufacturing itself. It's something you source. So you would just source something different.
That's correct. Yeah.
You've had a few companies place pre-orders for the ERX Agility and ANG. When you speak to them, what do they find most exciting about the ERX powertrain that's led them to place these pre-orders?
Yeah, I think for them, it's kind of like three wins for them, right? It's one is driving costs down, which is pretty unique. If you look at battery electric or fuel cell trucks today, it actually costs more to operate those in the long haul space than even a diesel truck. So cost savings is the number one. Emission savings is number two, and then being able to use the existing infrastructure is number three. And those are the three hurdles all that fleets are kind of faced with when looking at new technologies. Now, the great thing is whether it's a BEV truck, a fuel cell, natural gas range extender, all of us are focused on emission savings. So then it comes down to the other two of can you actually drive it at a lower cost, and can you use infrastructure that's already out there? And that's one of the great things we see with starting with natural gas on the Hypertruck end is that the infrastructure is already built out. There's already over 700 stations across North America here that you can drive a truck into, refuel, and get the vehicle back out on the road. Versus the electric recharging for semi trucks or the hydrogen refueling for fuel cell vehicles has not been established yet. And so that kind of goes back to what we were saying a minute ago of we've got a roadmap here where we can use existing infrastructure to get these vehicles out
there. A truck using the ERX powertrain could be a bit expensive. I think the company has estimated potentially $220,000 for a truck that's using the ERX powertrain, and more expensive than diesel and perhaps even certain battery electric vehicles. But a lot of these customers are looking at this in terms of payback period and total cost of ownership. So talk about what kind of savings your customers can realize to make up for that added upfront cost.
Yeah, so definitely a more expensive initial vehicle cost than a diesel truck, but it really comes back to that fuel cost being significantly less than diesel. That's what drives that fast payback, that ROI for the fleet, and ultimately over the life of the asset can save them a lot of money. And for fleets, a lot of these fleets are actually leasing their assets, so they're paying for a monthly, right? So from that standpoint, as long as you can save them more in fuel every month than their incremental increase on the lease, that's a huge win for a fleet. And that's what we're really targeting. And so we don't see the cost really being an issue on the Hypertruck solution. But one of the things that I think the industry is really diving into right now is really what are the costs going to be for the BEV and the fuel cell trucks, and that's where we actually project those to be more expensive than where our Hypertruck is coming to market. And I know there's numbers being thrown around on the BEV side, but when you start to actually look at the components that go into that truck, you've got close to $200,000 just in batteries alone, right? If you're going to try to get a 500-mile range out of a semi truck, you're going to need about 1,000 kilowatt hours of battery. And today, battery costs are probably in the $200 range. Maybe they're going down to 150, shortly here. But as a whole, you've kind of got about $150,000 to $200,000 worth of batteries, and that doesn't even include needing the chassis, needing the e-motors, the inverters to actually drive the vehicle. And so that's where we see that our price point coming to market is really competitive for that long haul space. Now, that's not to say BEV doesn't make sense for short haul and local deliveries, right? That's where we actually believe BEV makes a ton of sense, because you don't need as large of a battery pack, which means the vehicle is not going to cost as much, and you get to move to a zero tailpipe emission, renewable vehicle, but you don't have that issue of a really large battery solution.
Maybe we can stick on batteries. Hyliion is planning to use a lithium titanium oxide battery cell. Why did you choose that as opposed to a more traditional lithium ion battery? And is that the type of battery you think the company is going to stick with longer term?
So some key benefits to LTO, and we're sourcing the cells from Toshiba, so really reputable supplier, has a great name in the battery space, and we've had a lot of success with their battery cells. And then we do the actual module integration, the battery management system. That's all done by Hyliion. And so the benefits that come from LTO, though, as a chemistry, is that you can get higher charge and discharge rates. So from our end, we can just charge up the battery pack a lot faster than a conventional EV battery could be recharged. You also get much longer life cycles, so you can do tens of thousands of charge and discharge cycles versus the normal EV car battery is probably in the 5,000 sort of a range of charge cycles that it can go through. And then the last one, which is obviously really important, is the safety side of things. So LTO is notorious for being the one of the safest lithium-ion chemistries that's on the market today. And so from that standpoint, if there were to be an accident, a crash, a puncture through a battery pack, LTO is a much more stable and safer chemistry than if you were using an NMC or another type of chemistry that's normally used in EVs, which are more prone to causing a fire or a thermal event.
That's very interesting. Can we talk about the servicing strategy for the ERX trucks? And is that something that you expect will be a savings opportunity compared to diesel? I mean, how often are ERX based trucks going to need to get serviced, and where do you imagine that service taking place?
So electric powertrain, and this is one of the things that's often discussed, is there's less moving parts than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. So Hyliion's goal is to take advantage of that as well. As we did mention, though, the Hypertruck solution for today is using a internal combustion engine, so we still do have a generator under the hood that has those moving parts. But as you look at the electric drive solution, it's an electric motor and and the axles, and so in terms of the overall moving parts of the vehicle, it's less. Obviously, less moving parts means less maintenance on things, and so from that standpoint, we actually see this shift going in the electrification space to more of a modular replacement approach as opposed to an actual service approach. And so today, you pull a Class 8 truck into a service center, the technicians are trained to dive in and work on things, repair things, tear them apart, get the truck back and fixed and out back on the road. What we see happening in the EV space, it's going to be more modular, right? You're not going to want service locations to actually open up battery packs if there was an issue with the battery, at least not where we are today in terms of, having trained service centers across the US. So from that standpoint, we see, if there were to be a battery issue, it's more going to be a replacement of that full battery pack or module as opposed to a technician trying to actually service it in the field. So it's going to be a little bit of a different approach for service networks. Now, the exciting thing is that our approach is that we're partnering with service providers. We're not trying to build out our own service network, and the response we've gotten thus far has been, these service networks, they know electrification is coming, and they're trying to position themselves to be ready for that. And so that lends itself well to Hyliion being able to partner with already existing networks across the U.S. to be able to service the Hypertruck, as opposed to us needing to stand up our own service organization.
That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to talk about the cost equation, perhaps in a little bit of a different way, and think about what the cost curve could look like over time. Because I think a lot of trucks today, they're purchased by mom and pops, and that high upfront price for any of these alternative powertrain technologies can be a barrier to purchase for some of those sorts of buyers. So, how should we think about the cost of the truck developing over time?
Yeah, so over time, I think there'll be cost decreases both in battery packs and electric motors. I mean, just as volumes increase, that's going to drive costs going down. As mentioned before, though, for fleets, a lot of them are leasing these assets, or they're kind of paying for them on a monthly basis. So we don't see that initial upfront cost as really being a barrier to adoption, as long as you're offering them fuel savings, right? If you're trying to get them to pay more for the vehicle upfront and you're costing more on the recharging or on hydrogen fuel, that's an equation that I think is going to be really tough. But for Hyliion, with being able to offer them that low cost renewable natural gas, the product is saving more than what they're spending on the incremental upfront cost. So in terms of how that kind of cascades over the life of these vehicles, though, a lot of trucks today will get operated in the large logistics providers for 4 to 5 years, maybe up to 7, and then they're going to get flipped to a secondary user, right? And then from there, that fleet will run another 5 years on these assets, get them to about a little over 1 million miles overall, and then that's kind of the end of life of the truck. And so I think one of the really interesting things we're going to see here is what's that residual value of the asset when it actually gets flipped to the second operator. As long as your battery pack has significant life left still in it, we project that the electric motors are going to have a lot of life left in them. And so I actually think we can potentially get to a point where that residual value is higher on those vehicles for the second users. And potentially we're actually causing fleets to elongate how long they're holding on to these assets. Because going back to your last question, a lot of these fleets care about service, right? And so if we're decreasing the amount of time that these trucks are down for service, then they're going to hold on to them longer. So, I think we're creating an equation here with trucking fleets where they're going to be able to hold the asset longer. It'll cost a little bit more per month, but over the life of the vehicles, it's going to save them money from a fuel standpoint. And then when they actually go to sell the vehicle off, potentially there's going to be a higher residual value of that asset compared to where they're at with diesel today.
No, very interesting. Maybe we could talk a little bit more on the regulatory environment. And California has proposed to ban the sale of trucks with tailpipe emissions by 2045 when feasible. What is Hyliion doing to work with regulators on this topic?
Yes, we're in constant discussions with CARB, EPA. I mean, that we realize that that's a huge part of the strategy here with this shift towards electrification. CARB's come out with some milestones in this decade that OEMs are working towards. There's the push towards moving, the start of adoption of electric vehicles, as well as there's the Omnibus 2027 rule. Now, for Hyliion, and by the way, the Omnibus rule is really focused around reduced emissions coming off the vehicles, reduced NOx emissions specifically. So right out of the gate, the Hypertruck solution will be compliant with the Omnibus 2027 ruling, which we're going to do that years ahead of what CARB is mandating. And there's some discussions going on right now of potentially there being incentives for fleets that are actually adopting the Omnibus rule before it even comes into place. And so we're obviously a supporter of that because that will obviously give our fleets more of an incentive to move to the Hypertruck solution. But then in terms of the shift towards electrification, we're viewing the Hypertruck solution as an electric truck. Obviously, in the beginning here, we're using a natural gas range extender, which will have some tailpipe emissions, obviously a lot less than the tailpipe emissions out of a diesel, but there will be some. And then as we get to the future of fuel cell solutions, then we obviously have no tailpipe emissions on that truck. One of the interesting things that's come out of our discussions with CARB and the EPA is that there's two big pushes here, right? One is reducing emissions, but then the second is actually reducing them in high pollution areas, which is a key part of the value proposition of the Hypertruck, where you can actually drive that vehicle into a city or into a port and turn the generator off and run purely on BEV, have zero tailpipe emissions at all. But then when that vehicle leaves that area, the generator can kick back on and give you the range you need to actually go haul the cargo and make the delivery. So from that standpoint, we're able to geozone these vehicles so that they don't create any pollutions in high pollution areas, which is one of the big things that CARB has been working on. And the nice thing that we've seen is, going back to earlier in our discussion, CARB was really the inventors behind renewable natural gas. And so, they're viewing this as a way to combine one of the strong initiatives they've had in RNG with another strong initiative they have in electrification.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We talked previously about how HYLN has the potential to go to a zero emissions truck in the future as well, with hydrogen and limited incremental development costs for the company, because it utilizes essentially your current powertrain, just with a different generator. But any idea you can share around timing of when that may occur?
So that's a $1 million question, right? I mean, I don't think anyone exactly knows, and our goal is really just as a company to be positioned when it does happen, then we'll be ready for it. But if we start looking at some of like the kind of facts behind it, right? How do you get to a hydrogen future? It kind of first starts with, you need to start making hydrogen through electrolysis, and so that means, we need to start seeing an upswing in electrolysis facilities, hydrogen generation facilities using clean hydrogen or generating clean hydrogen. We haven't seen that huge upswing in that yet, right? And then that kind of cascades from there. Then you need to have, transportation of the actual fuel established. So are we going to create pipelines across the U.S., or is this going to be transported in fuel cargo trucks? And then the last part of it is stations, right? We actually need to create hydrogen refueling stations. So, my guess is here, in the not too distant future, we're going to start to see areas that can move to hydrogen, right? So, one of the areas that hydrogen makes a ton of sense is if you've got a dam where you can create, kind of free electricity at nighttime and free clean electricity, then you can actually use that to do electrolysis and produce hydrogen. So if you're a fleet that is operating near Niagara Falls at nighttime, you've got a lot of excess electricity, sure, go take that electricity, produce hydrogen, and run a local delivery fleet off of hydrogen in that area. But in terms of when we're going to move to kind of across the country, we've got stations built out like the natural gas infrastructure we have today. I can't even speculate when that's going to be, but it's not going to happen overnight. And that gives us enough time to position where when the hydrogen network's ready, our powertrain will be there as well.
That's great. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. So Thomas, really appreciate you joining us today and answering all of our questions, and looking forward to being in touch and seeing how everything progresses at Hyliion going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.